in the afternoon, there was a gradual build of demonstrators, and the area was cordoned off to make a sterile area around the town hall. At around 5:30 p.m., considerable pressure built up in the cordon. Mounted officers were used to dispel the crowd. The National Front meeting took place. 69 people entered the town hall. 20 were non-National Front locals, including 8 Asians. When the meeting ended at 8 p.m., the National Front speaker was escorted by the police out of the area. Blair Peach, a member of the Anti Nazi League, was taken to New Ealing Hospital by ambulance at 8:12 p.m., suffering from a head injury from which he subsequently died. This was a particularly violent demonstration, and the violence was mainly from the Asian youths, who appeared quite often to lose complete control of their emotions. From my experience of demonstrations, I am convinced that the violent attacks on the police and the property were pre-planned.
Truncheons drawn. Protection shields used. Number of arrests 342. Injuries to police 120. Injuries to prisoners 83. Injuries to the public 10, 1 fatal. Damages to police property 127. Loss of police property 161. Police horses injured 2. Damage to private property 29 to date. Loss of private property none reported to date.
A complaint has been laid against the police that Clement Blair Peach, aged 33 years, was assaulted by police with a truncheon and died at 12:10 a.m. on the 24th of April this year, 1979. Post-mortem examination established the cause of death as a fractured skull. The officers, the subject of the complaint, were unnamed officers with a special patrol group of the Metropolitan Police who were on duty at the demonstration in Southall on the 23rd of April this year. Continuing reports on the death of Clement Blair Peach are appearing in the press and on television, and it is a case receiving wide publicity and will be the subject of comment for a long time to come. The funeral of the deceased was akin to a potential demonstration. The inquest and evidence will be widely reported not only in this country, but abroad, especially in New Zealand, from where the deceased came several years ago. Confusion and conflicting accounts by private witnesses obviate a clear picture of what occurred. Clement Blair Peach was known to the Metropolitan Police, and if he had been true to form, he may have been in dispute, conflict, obstructing or interfering with the police. No officer has admitted striking Peach either deliberately, accidentally, or without realizing it. All the officers have been subjected to lengthy interviews, but they maintain their innocence of crime and complicity to conceal what occurred.
Who killed Blair Peach? Doesn't matter, because there was no killing. Not in the sense of a killing being intentional or negligent. It was death by misadventure, an act done without negligence or intent to harm, resulting in misfortune, an unlucky event, an accident, from the old French mésavenir, to result in misfortune, Your Honour. Death due to unintentional accident without any violation of law or criminal negligence is death by misadventure, which is the act of a person who, in the performance of a lawful act without any intention to do harm, and after using proper precaution to prevent danger, unfortunately kills another person, which is what happened at Southall. And which is what happens when you're up against the complex issues of policing a multiracial society, Your Honour. Blair Peach was the unfortunate victim of a police charge which used reasonable force to disperse a crowd of stone throwers during a political demonstration. It was death by moderate and lawful correction. If someone dies as the result of moderate and lawful correction, as every officer knows, it is death by misadventure, Your Honour.
Anyway, there was a large iron no entry sign on the corner of Beechcroft Avenue and Southall Broadway, so he could have run into that. Or, as the coroner suggested, though dismissed, though no one actually had put it forward in his court, and it had no basis in any evidence given by any of the witnesses, but nevertheless the coroner put it forward as one of two extremist theories about Blair Peach's death. One of two extremist theories. The other extremist theory being that the police were responsible. He could have been struck on the head by a left-wing fanatic in order to create a martyr.
I'm Inspector Alan Murray, who was in charge of the SPG carrier uniform 1/1 on April the 23rd and was the first one out of the van.
I am PC Grenville Bint. I was the second one out.
I'm PC James Scotto. I told Peach to get on his bike after he was hit.
I'm PC Anthony Richardson. I'd been with the Special Patrol Group for just 6 months.
I'm PC Michael Freestone. I was later transferred out of the Special Patrol Group.
I am PC Raymond White. I was the driver.
Those of you who've read the coroner's report into the death of Blair Peach and the London Metropolitan Police internal inquiry into what happened at Southall on April the 23rd, 1979, will know us better as
Officer E.
H.
G.
I.
J.
and F.
E.
H.
G.
I.
J.
F.
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Back!
Fuck off, cunt!
Back!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Back!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Back!
Fuck off, cunt!
Back!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Back!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off,
Move!
cunt! Fuck off,
Back!
cunt! Fuck off,
Move!
cunt! Fuck off, cunt!
Back!
Fuck off,
Out!
fuck off, cunt!
Out!
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement to the House on the events that occurred at Southall on the 23rd of April 1979. I've now received and considered the report from the Commissioner of Police of the Metropolis. The report did not and could not deal with the inquiry being conducted by Commander Cass into the circumstances surrounding the death of Mr. Blair Peach. His investigation is continuing, and the circumstances is continuing, and the outcome will be submitted to the coroner and the Director of Public Prosecutions. Nor did the Commissioner's report deal with individual complaints against the police. These will be dealt with in accordance with the statutory procedure. Mr. Speaker, there were two reasons for expecting violence on this occasion. The first was the National Front's decision to hold a meeting in Southall on the 23rd of April. It is the Commissioner's view that from the moment the National Front was given permission to hold an election meeting at Southall Town Hall, there was a real threat of serious public disorder. Many of those whom the Commissioner subsequently interviewed argued that the meeting should not have been allowed to take place. But the law does not allow election or other meetings to be banned on public order or any other grounds, nor does it permit a local authority any discretion in making premises available for election meetings on the grounds that the views likely to be expressed are offensive. The second reason was divisions with the Asian community in Southall. Despite the deep apprehension of the local Asian community, there were, in the days preceding the disturbances, useful and continuing discussions between the police and community leaders. Regrettably, however, the preparations for opposition to the National Front meeting revealed a growing difference between the young Asians and their elders, which, as events turned out, was easily exploited by extremist elements. I should like to deal with the main criticisms levelled against the strategy and tactics of the police. First, it is said that there were too many police on duty. The Commissioner rejects this, and I share this view. It is difficult to conceive that any number significantly less than the 2,750 deployed could have handled the situation better. Information available to the police in advance indicated that there might be several thousand demonstrators, and indeed some 3,600 are estimated to have taken part. Secondly, it is said that the Special Patrol Group should not have been deployed at Southall. The Commissioner does not accept this, and nor do I. It formed only part, and a very small part at that, of the deployment at Southall. As the Commissioner made clear in his recent annual report, the Special Patrol Group is used on a wide variety of tasks, including crime and traffic, as well as public order. The Commissioner has told me of his proposals for restoring and improving relations between the police and the local community in Southall. He will also be making renewed efforts to attract more Asians from the area as regular or special constables. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I should like to emphasise certain general points. The government firmly sets their face against extremist organisations, whether to the left or right, which seek to divide society and exploit racial tension. All who live in this country are equal before the law and should be treated as such. Anyone, private citizen or policeman, who breaks the law should be brought before the courts and, if found guilty, properly punished. Whatever the law may be, it is the duty of the police to uphold and enforce it impartially. That is what they were trying to do in Southall in very difficult circumstances. In my view, no police force in the world does it better. We ask much of our police in carrying out the duty that we lay upon them. I believe that we in the House owe them a reciprocal duty of wholehearted support.
I was the senior overall officer present at Southall that day. I ordered my people down that street. I'm sorry for Mrs. Peach. I'm sorry for all the bad publicity on the Special Patrol Group. I am sorry for the effect it has had on the individual careers of some of my colleagues in the SPG. But I would do the same thing again. If the crowd had not been dispersed then and there, a much larger and more dangerous confrontation would have developed later.
I've completed my inquiry concerning the death of Blair Peach at Southall on April the 23rd and strongly recommend that proceedings be taken against Officer E, Officer H and Officer F for obstructing police in the execution of their duty, conspiring to do so and attempting or conspiring to pervert the course of justice. I've considered the inquiry concerning the death of Clement Blair Peach and allied matters. In my opinion, the evidence is not sufficient to justify any criminal proceedings against any of the police officers named in the reports.
There continues to be a left-wing campaign making claims about the death of Blair Peach, and I have written to the Minister of the Crown about this and shall continue to do so. The accusation that Peach was killed by a police officer is a political fabrication. The inquest itself, over which I presided, was an example of the extreme left attempting to hijack an event for their own ends. There were the usual demonstrations by the usual people outside the courtroom. Some witnesses were telling palpable lies, and others who appeared did not have the experience of the English system to give reliable testimony. Further, I find it frustrating to be unable to control contemptible reports of the police that emerge from my own courtroom and appear in the media. Many policemen pointed out that in such a situation one looked upwards for the oncoming bricks and not around to see what others were doing.
We've become alarmed at recent communications made by the coroner on the Blair Peach inquest. The inquest found for death by misadventure and has since been the subject of controversy in the press and on television. Should copies of these communications fall into the wrong hands, they would be used to discredit the impartiality of coroners in general and the coroner of the Blair Peach inquest in particular. A great deal of harm could be done, not only to the standing of coroners, but also in respect to the Home Secretary, in his decision that a public inquiry into Peach's death should be resisted. Our advice to the coroner is this, that the whale which exposes his surface invites harpoons. And we hope this is the end of the matter.
Napier. First inhabitants, Ngāti Kahungunu, descended from Kahungunu, son of Tamatimu, the Tākitimu canoe. Then European traders and whalers, Anglican Church Missionary Society, William Colenso, a whole lot of Pākehās called Williams, a whole lot of merino sheep, Donald McLean, purchase and sale of great land blocks, Ahuriri. Newtown, named after Charles Napier, who defeated Indian subcontinent rebels at Miani near Hyderabad. Houses spring up, hotels, shops, churches, 1870s. Wool boomed, swamps drained, roads metalled, concert chamber built, marine parade constructed. The image of an English seaside resort. Napier.
Blair Peach lives in Douglas McLean Avenue, opposite the creek. Goes to Colenso High. To get to Colenso from Douglas and McLean, go to the intersection with Kennedy Road, turn right down Kennedy Road to the intersection with Riverbend Road, turn left into Riverbend Road, then right into Arnold Street, Colenso. First co-ed high school in the area. Previously, boys went to Napier Boys over in Napier South. Girls went to Napier Girls up on the hill. Suddenly, Colenso, co-ed. Everyone said the school nurse did abortions. Colenso, brilliant soccer team, playing 4-2-4 before anyone knew what that meant. Had a coach who used to talk about echelon formations. Blair Peach, playing out on the right wing, dark, looking Lebanese or something. Sallow, could be Jewish, could be Indian, could be Maori. Slippery, skinny, wiry, tough bastard, fighting you off. Taking the ball down the line, looking up, crossing it perfectly. Every Saturday at Nelson Park, the loneliness of Hawke's Bay soccer. Up against the Ranfurly fucking Shield. Thousands and thousands over at the McLean Park as Tremaine and Thimbleby and McRae and Davis defended the Shield. The distant roar. And Blair, watched by no one at Nelson Park, slipping down the right wing, looking up, making those perfect crosses every Saturday.
Blair Peach, 1946. Born 25th of March, just after the war. War against fascism, war against Hitler. Son of Clem and Janet. Clem Peach, his dad. Old Clem Peach, known as Plum Peach. Clem Peach, proud father, names a son born in 1946 after himself. Clement Blair Peach.
Blair Peach, 1964, takes the rail car for Wellington, Victoria University, studying English. Gets a flat with Dennis List, David Rutherford, co-editors with them of Argo. Student Literary Mag, one of the most important magazines of the new poetry, comment of Dr. Murray Edmund.
Poem by Louis Johnson. The slight youth, Jewish perhaps, a dark tousle of hair and owl-sized spectacles, who came to my house in the early 60s for poems for his student magazine.
Poem by Blair Peach. Why does he beckon with outstretched finger to me? Why do I stand, paralyzed within my body, trembling with fear that sickens my stomach until I force myself to turn away, head spinning and blindly vomiting at heavy shadow which draws me once again to my former spot? For God's sake, leave me alone. He was just an ordinary joker. We used to call him Plum. He liked his soccer. His father was a coach, and Blair played for Hawke's Bay. He was good, but he was just a little fella, small and wiry. He was the sort of guy when he got older that women wanted to mother. Almost the only politics I remember Blair being involved in was Maori. He was always sympathetic.
Blair Peach, 1969, moves to London, becomes a teacher at Phoenix School, East London. Bow, once part of the medieval parish of Stepney, then becomes its own man, 18th century, absorbed into London borough of Tower Hamlets, 1965. Bow, Phoenix School, special needs school.
He was a different kind of teacher. He was interested in us. He'd teach us and visit us and give advice and practical help whenever he could. He always practiced what he preached. At school, he instituted a special class to help those children who had difficulty in reading, and those classes were extended into the school holidays. He did this because he cared about these children and wanted them to be free-thinking adults who would not be pushed about. I know I'll never forget him, and he'll always be remembered as a friend of the people. Blair Peach, staying behind after school hours to coach football, calling for democratisation of his union, elected president of the East London Teachers Association.
My mum knew Blair Peach as a nice, gently spoken man, as they were both in the National Union of Teachers Rank and File group. She told me Blair taught ESN, which is educationally subnormal kids, and that the National Front members would pull him off his bike while he was cycling to and from school in East London.
Rank and file teachers calling for an increase in teachers' salaries. Teachers at Phoenix voting to take unofficial industrial action. Blair Peach and others summoned to appear before a governor's panel. Threatened with disciplinary action. Threatened with disciplinary action not only by a school, threatened with disciplinary action by the National Union of Teachers. Action dropped when the scale of the parents' supports for Peach became clear.
Blair Peach moves in with a woman, not his wife. Celia Stubbs. He was not a martyr, nor a cause for the left. He was just a dedicated teacher, a committed trade unionist and anti-fascist. He was a good, funny and loving person to his family and friends. He was a socialist who believed passionately in fairness and equality. He supported the Bengali community in their protests against the National Front selling newspapers in Brick Lane, demonstrated outside a pub that would not serve black customers, was instrumental in getting the National Front headquarters closed in Shoreditch. It is amazing that he's remembered by so many people. When he died, I wanted privacy. In the end, I was glad he was a public event.
Blair Peach, member of the Socialist Workers' Party, trots, arguing that the essence of socialism is workers' control, which is nothing more or less than socialism with its working clothes on, which the Soviet Union and its satellites and Mao Zedong's China clearly lack. Old Socialist Working Party joke. Somewhere in one of the Central Asian republics of the old Soviet Union, this great steam locomotive is thundering across an arid, featureless plain with a string of carriages out behind it. In one of the carriages sits Lenin, Stalin, Khrushchev and Brezhnev. Suddenly the train comes to a halt, a juddering stop. In the carriages you can hear the roaring steam from the great locomotive up front hissing out into the desert air, and then gradually it all dies away to nothing. Silence. The train sits there in an empty landscape of sky and dirt and far off horizons. Lenin suddenly steps out of the carriage. The others listen to his footsteps heading away towards the front of the train. They hear the sound of voices. They hear Lenin speaking. They hear a round of applause. They hear Lenin returning. He re-enters the carriage, sits, addresses the others. The problem has been sorted out. A Workers' Soviet of Railway Workers has been formed. Decisions are being voted on. Comrades, we are heading for the promised land. The others applaud. Then silence. Train doesn't move. Stalin stands, leaves the carriage. Sound of his footsteps disappearing into the distance. And then we hear a rapid series of gunshots. Stalin returns, sits, addresses the others. There was a problem. It has been sorted out. Relax. We are heading for the promised land. Silence. The train still doesn't move. Khrushchev stands, leaves the carriage. Sound of his footsteps, the sound of raised voices. We hear a long speech by Khrushchev. We hear his footsteps return, pulling up outside the carriage. He beckons Stalin out. Stalin steps out. Khrushchev shoots Stalin. Khrushchev re-enters the carriage, addresses the others. Injustices have been committed. These have been rectified. Those wrongly treated have been rehabilitated. Our problems have been sorted out. Once again, comrades, we are heading for the promised land. Khrushchev sits. Silence. Train doesn't move. Brezhnev stands, leaves the carriage, steps over the body of Stalin, disappears toward the front of the train. The sound of murmuring voices, then silence. Finally, Brezhnev returns, re-enters the carriage, sits, looks out the window. Sky, dirt, aridity, distant, empty horizons. The others stare at him, wait. He turns to them. There are no problems, he says. Again he looks out the window. This is the promised land. Socialist Workers' Party, biggest left-wing group in Britain. Autumn 1977, Lewisham. An attempt by National Front members to march down Lewisham High Street is stopped by a mass of demonstrators led by the Socialist Workers' Party. Police repeatedly attempt to charge the demonstrators down. Each time they're driven back. In the aftermath, a national coalition, the Anti Nazi League, is formed. Its aim to combat the National Front.
National Front, British far-right political party for whites only. Opposed to immigration unless from the old Commonwealth, South Africa, Rhodesia, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Committed to a program of repatriation of colours. Founded in 1967. Mid-1970s, 14,000 paid members. Fielding a record 303 candidates in the 1979 general elections. There is a small, self-perpetuating elite who control the factories, the mines, the offices, and where 20 million people work. They own the land on which the buildings stand. They own the buildings. They control society. They shape it to meet their needs. They keep themselves in luxury. The decisions they make are based on one thing only: how to make even more money for themselves out of the fabulous wealth they already own. No one elected them. The top judges and generals, the company directors and the bankers inherited their enormous wealth and power, and we put up with it. We put up with big business and big unions and big government colluding together, and we vote Labour. But is Labour going to stop it? Does Labour have any answers? Labour's answer is to swamp us with blacks.
Yeah.
Labour's answer is to open the floodgates.
Yeah.
Pakis,
Indians,
Bangladeshis,
West Indians,
Africans, in they come, take our
can't
jobs,
speak English,
stick to themselves.
stink the place out.
This country used to be great,
Used to be Great Britain.
used to rule the world.
Won the World Cup.
Home was our castle. Merciless, money-grinding bankers laid a yoke on our neck, let anyone in to work in their factories. We are no longer free Saxons.
We're mongrels.
We've lost our race and lost our
We
pride.
are half-caste offspring.
We are the products of international finance and international communism.
Yeah.
We are interbred.
Interbred.
The whole of humanity submerged into a single, slant-eyed, khaki-coloured mongrel mass.
Yeah.
All sense of national self-identity disappearing. Let us fight back!
Fight back.
The pitiful heaps of physical degeneration we see littering our streets today in the cities
Yeah.
are the social heritage handed down to us.
Fight back.
Remove this human record.
Yes.
Yes, stand up for the small Englishman against the powerful foreigner.
Fight back.
Stand up against the blacks and the khakis.
Fight back.
Fight back! Fight back!
Blair Peach, sallow complexion, could be Jewish, could be Indian, could be Lebanese, could be Maori. Whole of humanity submerged into a single khaki-coloured mongrel. I knew Blair from the mid-1970s. We used to go down Brick Lane in the East End on weekends to prevent the National Front from holding their paper sales there. The police had made it clear that they would allow either the left or the National Front to sell papers there, and they would then just move the other side on. Whoever got there first would keep the pitch. So every Friday and Saturday, we'd spend 2 wet and cold nights sleeping on Brick Lane. In my memory, though, Blair's always smiling.
What concerned Blair more than anything was the growth in organised racism in East London. He didn't just speak out, condemn the rise in the influence of the National Front. He organised against them in the classroom, trade union meeting and the street. There was a particular electricity about Blair's spoken interventions. He had the stammer. It sometimes interfered with his delivery, yet his courage was such that his words and arguments always emerged. All his colleagues knew that the words had come and waited as he struggled. Even if you disagreed with his arguments, you still felt so close to him and proud that you were debating with such a brave mind. One thing you'd notice he didn't stammer when he was teaching. or when he was talking to children.
He had certain cheerful hopefulness. He had this lack of social ambition or pretension, and a wryness, and sometimes bitterness. He had this desire for justice.
Blair Peach, 1974. Union meeting at the Mile End Teachers' Centre. Blair Peach and others go to Railway Tavern, Grove. Oh. Blair Peach hears from patron that the landlord of the Railway Tavern won't serve blacks. I say, good for him. As far as I'm concerned, blacks are all pimps, queers and prostitutes. Blair Peach and the other teachers leave and go to a tavern further down the road. They return. They stand outside the Railway Tavern and advise people not to drink there because of its colour bar. Blair Peach goes inside with some of the West Indians. Publican refuses to serve them. Blair Peach asks, why? Police are called. Police tell Blair Peach and his friends to leave. Blair Peach asks, why?
Because you've been fucking told to, nick him.
Charged with threatening behaviour, acquitted. As he leaves the court, a policeman says,
You got off this time, Peach.
Blair Peach, 1978. Arrested outside a school where the National Front is holding a meeting. Police had arrested a fellow demonstrator. Blair instinctively places himself between her and the arresting officer and says, leave her alone, she hasn't done anything. Convicted of obstruction, fined £50.
Blair Peach, known to the police.
I made 2 television a series about the police and then edited a book of interviews with them. Theirs is a sense of isolation from the public.
Yeah, one time there was quite a crowd, about 60, very jumpy, and in there was a 5-year-old whose shoelaces were undone. So I'm standing there and I said to the little girl with her mum, I said, look, your shoelaces are undone, darling. And she said, fuck off, you fascist pig! It's a 5-year-old. Seriously, I said, well, fair enough.
They also feel cut off from their senior officers whom they believe left the beat too long ago to know what it's really like out there now.
There's this joke we all told. See, a young PC, he loses his bottle in the front line, throws down his shield, runs away. Finally, he collapses in the doorway, starts sobbing. A voice from behind him says, come on, son, come on, get back in there. Oh, sorry, Sarge, says the lad. I just couldn't take it anymore. I'm not your sergeant, says the voice. I'm your superintendent. Oh, crikey, sir, says the boy. I didn't know I'd run that far. Demonstrations, they're the easiest place to pick up those with no leadership quality. You can always tell a senior officer at a demonstration, they walk around and do pirouettes, listening to the radio and saying, no, it's okay, it's all right, yep, 10-4. They just can't handle it. You know if you're going to have a good demonstration because you know beforehand who's going to be in charge. If it's a wanker, you think, oh Christ, we've got a problem here. Because invariably, at some point, the bloke will not make a decision or will make the wrong one.
The British tendency to riot as an expression of political dissent has ancient roots. Ever since the 14th century, the peasants' revolt, the mob, who couldn't vote, had only the streets in which to make their presence felt. By the 19th century, the persistent threat of this kind of social disorder was threatening to impede industrial expansion. The police were then founded to provide a more reliable means than sabre-swinging soldiers to control disorder, crime, and what was seen as the decline in moral values.
See, the first riots, they catch you on the hop, but not the second. When it happens again, you're ready for them. You have to make the first move. You drive straight at the bastards, and then they scatter. You deal with the rest with your sticks, no problem.
At demonstrations, SPG officers were kept caged up like animals in a zoo until things got totally out of hand. Then the seniors would say, oh shit, that bubble's burst, better call out the SPG. And we'd come running out into mayhem, and we'd have to kick people and bang heads together to restore order. Once order was restored, it was all, SPG are animals.
Yeah. Well, society gets the police force it deserves. In 77 and 78, when I was at the training school watching them come in, we were taking a particularly aggressive type of person. I don't know why, but when you looked outside, there was crowd violence, gang fights on the streets were just quite common. seemed to me that society was venting its spleen. If you didn't like what someone said or the way he looked, you just took a swipe at him.
The police despise and fear the public because they think the public doesn't appreciate them. They feel that everyone and everything conspires against them. The community, the courts, the politicians, the entire legal system, and even their bosses. In every country, you will find one union that has 100% membership. It's the police union.
So when you come out of training school, there's only one thing on your mind, and that's being accepted. You look out for whatever it is you have to do to be accepted, and you do it. It might be, looking the other way when a bloke's being hammered. If I lose my rag and get out of order, the other blokes look after me, and I'm going to do the same for them if they do anything they shouldn't do. But I'm not going to do time for anybody else. I can tell you, if it comes down to that, in choosing being loyal to your mates and maybe doing time, well, I'd look out for number one. You've got to do it in this game, you've got to.
Advice from a detective inspector to a constable facing a disciplinary charge.
Never tell the truth.
Statement from the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police on the public record.
The police force is representative of society. It is as racially prejudiced as the society from which it is drawn.
Comment from a black journalist.
Well, that doesn't surprise some of us who've been on the business end of an SPG operation.
Reply for the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, again on public record.
I understand the concern of your people, but if you keep off the streets of London and behave yourselves, you won't have the SPG to worry about.
One of the reasons I'm thinking of leaving the force is that I see changes in me that I don't like. It's not that I'm more aggressive, but I'm harder, coarser, less patient. I realise I have a capacity for evil. It's there. I could do things which are evil, which I wouldn't have dreamt of before. I can see how Hitler got there. I liked me better before.
Like my partner, I joined the police as a naive student, 21 years old. I thought the world was a wonderful place and I was going to go out and make it even better, but after 10 years...
Maybe it's part of the growing up process, I don't know. You go into a world where it suddenly takes you over. You're trying to understand all these ridiculous things taking place day after day. The violence, what people can do to other people. The arguments, ridiculous fights that take place when somebody knocked over a pint or didn't like the colour of someone's shirt or something. All pissed out of their brains. The viciousness and callousness, the lying and the cheating that goes on amongst humanity. And somehow, somewhere, you've got to wind your way through this and try and find a path which is called the law. And the damage that is done as you try and find this path.
Britain, 1979. Once I had a love and it was a gas. Soon turned out, had a heart of glass. We are the sultans. We are the sultans of hit me with your rhythm stick. Hit me, hit me. Je t'adore, liebe dick. Hit me, hit me, hit me.
Oliver's army is here to stay. Oliver's army are on their way. And I would rather be anywhere else than here today.
Oh, Britain, 1979. Middle of an election campaign that will end with the victory of Margaret Thatcher.
Where too many people have begun to understand that if they have a problem, it is the government's job to cope with it. They cast problems on society. And you know, there is no such thing as society. There are just individual men and women. People talk about freedom. There can be no freedom unless it is economic freedom. Limited government, light regulations, low taxes, and maximum labour market flexibility. That is the answer. And disciplining yourself to know what is right, and hard work. I do not know anyone who has gotten to the top without hard work. As for socialism, the problem with socialism is that you eventually run out of other people's money. No one would remember the Good Samaritan if only he had had just good intentions. He had to have money as well.
Britain, 1979, St George's Day, National Front election meeting, Southall Town Hall.
At 9 a.m. on April the 23rd, I left for work, and Blair was still in bed. I had an idea he would be going to the demo in Southall. You wouldn't describe Southall as a suburb. It was always an industrial town built around the railway and the canal. It long attracted migrants to work in its factories.
The Welsh settled in Southall during the Depression of the 1930s. They'd walked from the Welsh valleys to do so, looking for work. Soon after the Second World War, large numbers of Asians came, large numbers from the Punjab, come to work in one of the factories. At first there was opposition. Indeed, with each successive wave of migrants, tensions rose. I can remember, at the top of Trinity Road, whitewashed on the wall was "Go Home Welshers," on the very spot where I was later to see "Go Home Blacks," the very same spot.
By the 1970s, there was also a strong sense of community and a feeling in Southall, especially among the second generation of Asians who were born in Britain, that they wouldn't tolerate the levels of racism and discrimination which their parents had suffered.
It was insane to allow the National Front meeting there. Southall was one of the most racially diverse areas in London. In 5 wards surveyed in 1976, 46% of the population had been born in what the National Front called the New Commonwealth.
It was insane. The day before the meeting, 5,000 people had marched to the Ealing Town Hall to protest, handing in a petition signed by 10,000 people. On the way, they passed National Front youths wearing swastikas and shouting, "Bloody blacks, go home!"
On the day of the Southall, I paraded Unit 1 of the Special Patrol Group at our headquarters at Barnes, West London. I told the 28 men they'd been chosen as a mobile reserve at Southall that afternoon. It promised to be a tasty demo.
The National Front's candidate wasn't standing in Southall in the hope of securing a high vote. The National Front was in Southall to teach immigrants a lesson. The Special Patrol Group was there to teach the Anti Nazi League a lesson. This was not going to be a repeat of Lewisham.
I had no doubt whatsoever that Unit 1 could handle whatever the day offered. It had attended some of London's most celebrated demonstrations. Unit 1 could take care of themselves. It had acquired a very special esprit de corps. It had its own off-duty t-shirts that read "Premier Unit Cobras." The cobra was the symbol adopted by the SPG. To rile London's 5 other SPG units, it would arrive on duty, humming in unison the Dam Busters March. Da, 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 da. Ah, they were a great bunch. I was very proud of them. Move! Fuck off, cunt! Move! Fuck off, cunt! Move! Fuck off, cunt!
Back!
Fuck off, cunt!
Back!
Fuck off, cunt!
Back!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Back!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt! Fuck off, cunt!
Back!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Back!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Back!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Back!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt! I was the chief officer of SPG Unit 1. I was 29, youngest inspector appointed to the SPG, expecting to be a commander by the age of 40 and, with any luck, a chief constable to climax my career. I thought about joining the army on leaving school and then decided to follow in the footsteps of my grandfather, a policeman of 32 years. Went to Bramshill Police College, marked out as chief inspector material. I like community work. I helped run a centre for black youths in Clapham. I was godfather to a West Indian baby. I was also quite active. Some coppers looked for motorists, jumping traffic lights. I was one of those who went out nicking criminals. And there were a lot of criminals to be nicked. I was inspector by the age of 25. I looked to see where my career might lead me next. Well, I figured the Special Patrol Group. The Special Patrol Group was a response to the development of what we call fire brigade policing, putting out sudden fires, as distinct from regular patrols when nothing's happening. It's a quick reaction force. The police rush in a group to trouble spots. There's a downside. The downside is the public only see the police in a conflict situation. Previously, the police relied on public support. Now they carry weapons and arrive in force. It's a style of policing more akin to that of an occupying army. So London becomes more like Northern Ireland. It's come out of the need for preventive patrolling of housing estates. It now plays a prominent role in industrial disputes and demonstrations, and is fully trained and equipped for anti-terrorist work. It's a paramilitary force, basically. We have a lot of freedom to operate on our own initiative. When I'm out with my unit, I'm on my own. I'm my own boss. I don't have to ring up and say, "Governor, do you think this is right?" No, I follow my own experience and do what's expected. Now, we carry with us all what we call the keys, as in keys to the door, sledgehammers, crowbars, pickaxe handles. You know, when you're looking for gear, it's no good politely knocking on the door, is it? And now, strictly speaking, this isn't authorised, but when we use the keys to help clear demonstrators away from the Conservative Party's headquarters, we got a letter of thanks from their chairman, which was passed on by the Commissioner. So, as for public disturbances, demonstrations, well, when you're confronting demonstrators, you don't just march up and glare at them, because that's bad news. No, you go and tell them to do something. Get off the pavement. Anything. Anything. You just speak to them. You are not averse to using strong language. Fuck off, cunt. The important thing is to damp down potential violence as quickly as possible. Our policy is to remove the ringleaders from the crowd. It isn't hard to pick them out, the real nasties. They're the ones who come for trouble, the ones who send prickles up your spine.
Blair, he had a certain cheerful hopelessness. He had this lack of social ambition or pretension, and a wryness and sometimes bitterness. Had this desire for justice. One thing you'd notice, he had this stammer, but you'd notice he didn't stammer when he was teaching or when he was talking to children.
At 4 p.m. that day, we were ordered to Southall, where police had been attacked by demonstrators. We arrived at 5 p.m, blue lights flashing and emergency horns blaring. Two tones, we call them. Da, 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 da. The chief super warned us that the utmost vigilance was required. That is, watch your backs, lads. Keep your eyes open for groups of nasties.
In the afternoon, there'd been a gradual build-up of demonstrators, and the area was cordoned off to make a sterile area around the town hall. At around 5:30 p.m, considerable pressure built up on the cordon. Mounted officers were used to disperse the crowd.
At about 6:15 p.m, we found ourselves heading into a cul-de-sac. This was Parkview Road. I was particularly alarmed by the activity around number 6 Parkview Road. It was a building that the demonstrating were using as a medical and legal aid centre. I suspected it had a far more sinister purpose. There were people in huddles around it. I spotted groups going in and out. I felt there was trouble. One of my sergeants said,
"We are well in trouble here if things go wrong."
I was also alarmed by the shouts I could hear from a megaphone. "The pigs are here! Go out and fight!" I was certain that prompt action was vital, so I radioed for reinforcements. Couldn't get any. A shower of missiles came out of number 6. A brick crashed into our van while I was radioing. The demonstrators came at us. I lashed out with my truncheon.
Other officers charged into number 6. Most of the occupants were forced to pass a gauntlet of officers on the stairs. The officers had truncheons. Several demonstrators were badly injured. It was understandable, but not excusable, and it wouldn't have happened if there were senior officers inside. I'd say for most at Southall, this was the climax of the day's events. The scales of the arrests in Southall, more than 700 people were picked up. It meant that nearly every family in what had traditionally been a peaceful community now had a direct and disagreeable contact with the police.
One of those arrested was a 14-year-old Sikh boy. He appeared before a magistrate at Ealing Juvenile Court, charged with threatening behaviour and being in possession of offensive weapons at 6:30 p.m. on April the 23rd. The sum total of the prosecution case was the evidence of one policeman who stated that he'd seen the accused with an offensive weapon at 6:20 p.m. The defence produced several witnesses. These included a white doctor, a white solicitor, and a white ambulanceman. They all testified that the boy at the time was being treated for a hand wound and had lost a severe amount of blood. They knew because they were all in the legal aid and first aid room at number 6 Parkview Road, Southall. I was with them when the police raided this address and arrested the boy in question and numerous others. The boy was found guilty and fined £100. The defence argued the boy had no job, no source of income. The magistrate replied, let him go find a job. The defence replied that it is a criminal offence for a 14-year-old boy to gain employment.
Used by the police in their eviction of 6 Parkview Road, which was being used as a medical centre and refuge, was so serious, arbitrary and unjustified as in itself to constitute grounds for an inquiry into the behaviour of the police. The random violent arrests by police snatch squads contributed to the anger of the crowds. Instructions for the use of the truncheons were ignored on a massive scale. Far from being used only for self-protection or as a last resort to effect an arrest, both short and long truncheons were used on a number of occasions in Southall as an instrument of arbitrary, violent and unlawful punishment.
For the next hour, Unit 1's task consisted of sporadic rushes to clear demonstrators who appeared to be threatening trouble. By 7:45, we were beginning to relax, and I wondered whether we could find some tea. That's when we got a call for urgent assistance.
Blair Peach and 3 friends, all of them members of the Anti-Nazi League, had arrived at Southall at about 4:45 p.m, intending to demonstrate at the town hall. They found their way blocked by police cordons. They remained on Broadway until 7:45 p.m. Confusion, frustration and fear was being caused within the crowd on Broadway by the fact that for much of the time they had been hemmed in by 2 police cordons. A number of shop windows had been broken and some missiles thrown at the police. From about 7:30 p.m. onwards, protesters began to leave the Broadway. Many of them went into Beechcroft Avenue, which was not cordoned off and which appeared to offer a means of getting away from the crowd and back to the railway station. Missiles were still being hurled at the police in the Broadway. An officer on the Broadway was hit by a brick which was thrown by someone in the crowd that had gathered in Beechcroft Avenue. His jaw was fractured in 3 places.
I'd just like to take the opportunity at this stage to say that differentiating brick throwers and stone throwers in a crowd from others is extremely difficult. I'm of the opinion that if a person remains part of a crowd which is throwing missiles, then that is collective support and guilt by presence. One is practically as bad as the other.
The police charged into Beechcroft Avenue carrying riot shields and truncheons. Once into Beechcroft Avenue, they made their way for 2 special patrol group vans.
We turned the van into Beechcroft Avenue and we stopped and we leapt out with truncheons.
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Back!
Fuck off, cunt!
Back!
Fuck off, cunt!
Back!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Back!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Back!
Cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Back!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Back!
Fuck off, cunt!
Move!
Fuck off, cunt!
Back!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt!
Out!
Fuck off, cunt! And my once fine career was no more.
Inspector, this is a very serious business. I understand you have made a 911 and cannot assist as to how Clement Blair Peach received the fatal injury to his head.
No, I can't. I got out at the junction of Beechcroft and Broadway.
So you wouldn't have seen Peach hit.
That's right.
You realise we're going to check that
How much longer have I got to stay here and be questioned like this?
until we finish our questions.
I don't feel well. I need food.
Constable, who was in the front passenger seat?
I don't know.
Who else was in the van?
I think Murray, Richardson and the driver. But I can't recall if anyone else was in the van.
How many officers can a van carry?
Oh, any amount.
How long had you been in the van?
I don't recall. It was a confusing incident.
Where was PC Richardson sitting?
I don't know.
Did you get out of the van on your own incentive?
I don't know.
Did you follow anyone out?
No.
Was it on Inspector Murray's orders?
I don't know. I have almost no memory of what happened.
But you are quite certain that the van stopped at the start of Beechcroft Avenue rather than further down the road where Peach was struck?
Yes.
I put it to you that you were lying.
I've got nothing to hide.
I have a list of officers who remember you getting out at the corner of Orchard Avenue and Beechcroft Avenue.
Well, if they recollected different, then there you go.
Once more, I put it to you that you were lying.
All I can say is that is how I recollect it.
Perhaps your memory might be faulty.
That's how I recollect it.
Constable, during a search of your locker, you were found to have been in possession of a lead-weighted, leather-plated stick, Nazi regalia, bayonets, German awards and medals from the First and Second World Wars. What's all this about then?
I also have British regimental badges and bayonets.
Constable, 3 officers climbed into your van and you drove them away.
I really don't remember.
Did you recognise those officers?
As I said, I don't recall.
They were from your unit.
As I said.
But you do remember that you stopped the van at the start of Beechcroft Avenue rather than further down the road where Peach was struck?
Yes.
You're sure?
Yes.
Constable, you had 6 unauthorised weapons in your locker. When you realised your locker was about to be searched, you tried to conceal one, a metal pot.
Yeah, well, when I heard the officers from the complaints division were on their way, I think, you know, in a moment of panic or whatever happens in those split seconds, I put the cosh in my anorak pocket.
This cosh was made from heavy gauge spring, topped by lead and wrapped with tape.
Yes.
As well, you had a crowbar and a jemmy in your locker.
Well, they were to help with executing search warrants.
Along with
Souvenir, I've been on a trip to America.
a whip handle
Yeah, I picked it up, one of the carriers.
from one of the police carriers.
Yeah, an SPG carrier.
And a heavy brass handle as used on some winches.
Yes.
Do you realise how serious this is? Did you have them with you at Southall?
Well, that would be a stupid thing to do, wouldn't it?
Constable, do you remember how the van you were in, SPG carrier U1/1, was first driven into Beechcroft Avenue?
No,
Did it stop?
I can't recall.
Did it slow down?
Can't recall.
Did it make a clean sweep of the area?
I really can't recall.
Who was in the van?
I don't remember.
Who was in charge of the van?
Don't know.
Were you ordered to get out of the van?
Don't know.
You must have been ordered out.
Can't remember.
Which door did you get
I
out?
can't recall.
But you do remember. This is your statement. You do remember getting out of the van, seeing a white man holding a brick as if to throw it at you, then chasing the man who had turned and run away back towards Broadway, thus taking you out of the area where the incident occurred and hence no way involved in the death of the deceased.
Yes.
Inspector, I'm going to read back to you part of the transcript of our first interview. Question. This is a very serious business. I understand you made a 991 and cannot assist as to how Clement Blair Peach received the injury to his head. Answer. No, I can't. I got out at the junction of Beechcroft and Broadway. Question. So you wouldn't have seen Peach hit? Answer. That's right. So now you admit you got out of the carrier at the corner of Beechcroft and Orchard?
Yes.
Well, why did you say you got out of the carrier at that junction of Beechcroft and Broadway?
Look, I've put it right. I've been thinking about it 50 times a day. It just came to me.
It came to you because you know that we know you got out at the junction of Beechcroft and Orchard.
Yeah, well, I've been thinking about it and it came to me.
If you got out at the junction of Beechcroft and Broadway, you wouldn't have seen Peach hit. But in fact, you got out at the junction of Beechcroft and Orchard, so you were there. You would have seen how it happened.
Well, I didn't.
I want to know how Peach got his injury. Did you or one of your men hit him in the head?
Is that what you want me to say?
I want the truth.
Can't help you.
You claimed in your original report that there were non-SPG officers ahead of you in Beechcroft Avenue. After no small investigation, we have found this to be untrue.
My solicitor says I don't have to answer any more questions.
Constable, In your original interview, you gave the same account as two other officers, that you stopped the van at the start of Beechcroft Avenue rather than further down the road where Peach was struck. One of the officers, under further questioning, has rescinded that. I am now cautioning you. You realise the implication of being cautioned?
Yes?
A man has been killed. You are a suspect. Anything you say may be used as evidence against you in court. Further, anything you fail to mention and which you later seek to rely on in court may draw an adverse inference. You were the driver. Where did you stop the van?
We stopped further down the road.
Near where Peach was struck?
Yes.
Then what happened?
Inspector Murray got out and he and the other officers forced the demonstrators around the corner into Orchard Avenue, pushing them in face-to-face close contact.
This is the location where Peach was struck down?
That's where they went.
Inspector Murray and other officers?
Inspector Murray and Officer Bint. They got out of the carrier on the corner and went straight into the crowd.
No, who was in the van in all?
Inspector Murray, Constables Bint, Scotto, Richardson and Freestone.
And you're able to name them?
Yes.
Do you remember them?
Yes.
Previously, you denied any memory of what took place. Now you're able to name all the occupants of the vehicle.
Well, it's come back to me.
I suggest to you that you have been prevaricated in order to frustrate the identification and punishment of Peach's killer.
In my position now, I wouldn't be protecting anyone, and that's the truth.
Well, what position is that, do you think? Oh, you mean the kosh and the weapons found in your locker?
Yes.
Yes, indeed. By the way, who had the radio? The wound on the deceased, in fact, did not match with the kosh. At a subsequent post-mortem examination, a number of truncheons and other items, including a kosh and a standard-type steel-cased Motorola personal radio on issue to SPG officers, was shown to a forensic expert whose opinion was that the personal radio was the most likely instrument, as it was clearly related to the size of the injury. Whilst it can reasonably be concluded that the police officer struck the fatal blow and that the officer came from carrier 1/1, there is insufficient evidence to charge any officer with the death. I'm sure that it will be agreed that the present situation is far from satisfactory and disturbing. The attitude and the untruthfulness of some of the officers involved is a contributory factor. The most serious aspect of this case has, without doubt, been the obstruction of the investigating officer in the execution of their duty. It can be clearly seen from the various statements and records of the interviews with these officers that their explanations were seriously lacking, and in the case of Officer E, Officer F and Officer H, there was a deliberate attempt to conceal the presence of the carrier at the scene at the vital time. But there is insufficient evidence to charge any officer with the death.
I've now considered the inquiry concerning the death of Clement Blair Peach and allied matters. In my opinion, the evidence is not sufficient to justify the criminal proceedings against any of the police officers named in the reports. Continuing reports on the death of Clement Blair Peach are appearing in the press and on television, and it's a case receiving wide publicity and will be the subject of comment for a long time to come. The inquest and evidence will be widely reported, not only in this country but abroad, especially in New Zealand, from where the deceased came several years ago.
Blair. I arrived with Blair and two other friends at the Broadway for a peaceful sit-down protest outside the town hall where the National Front meeting was taking place. We were prevented from doing so by a police cordon. We stayed in the Broadway for about 3 hours, and there was no crowd violence, no windows broken, no missiles thrown. We were leaving to go home and were walking up a side street when we were attacked by the policemen with truncheons and riot shields. I stood in a doorway of a shop and Blair was further ahead of me. He waited for me and I caught up with him. After the policeman in the first charge withdrew, A police van drove in the back of the retreating crowd and was followed by policemen on foot. All of a sudden, the whole place was alive with policemen attacking everyone with truncheons. They seemed to just multiply in a matter of seconds. And Blair was trying to encourage me to run forward. I could not make up my mind. The next time I saw him, he seemed to be coming back, trying to shield himself from blows from a policeman. I assumed it was from a truncheon. It was a weapon of that shape, a long and fairly narrow weapon. The blow fell on his head.
But the witness cannot identify the officer hitting Peach.
The task of identifying the officer I saw hit Blair was made difficult by the fact that 3 months had passed before I was asked to do an identity parade. At one lineup, all the police wore beards. The officer in charge explained to me because the suspect involved had grown one since the Southall demonstration.
The witness also received brief treatment in the hospital.
I was right up against the wall on the pavement. I saw another man lying on the ground on his side. There were about 3 or 4 policemen having a go at him. They seemed to be queuing up to hit him. They seemed to be going for his testicles and hitting him down there. And I said, can't you stop hitting him now? One of the policemen looked at me and came towards me. I could not believe it. He hit me on the head with a truncheon. I then found Blair at a nearby house where he was sitting in an armchair in the front room. I held his hand, but I did not speak to him.
The witness is a fellow member of the Anti Nazi League, and for the sake of the objectors of their cause, I would not put it past her adding the assault on Peach to her account of the matter, which otherwise would seem to be reasonably accurate.
I saw a man attacked by the police. The police came out of the van, the policeman hit him with his truncheon and the man collapsed 1.5 yards round the corner on Orchard Avenue. The police officer attacked him more than once. I saw 4 policemen get out of the police van and 2 grabbed an Indian youth and the other 2 grabbed a white man and hit him. One of the officers caught him and the other hit him on the head with his truncheon. I saw about 10 policemen running down Beechcroft Avenue towards Orchard Avenue chasing people. People were being arrested and 2 policemen caught a man and one of them hit him on the head. The policeman only hit him once and it didn't seem to be a very heavy, hard blow. It all happened very, very quickly. The policeman who carried out the assault then walked back up Beechcroft Avenue. I think it was 3 policemen who hit the man. The first officer out of the front van hit the man on the corner with a truncheon on the head. The man then fell to the ground. The police officer then ran off up Beechcroft Avenue. 2 policemen came out of the van. One of them held the man by his shirt front. The other hit him twice on the head with a truncheon. The man was knocked down by the blow. At about 7:30 to 8 o'clock, I saw blue vans coming down Beechcroft Avenue. They were coming very fast. As they came around Beechcroft Avenue, they stopped. I saw policemen with shields come out. The people started running and the police tried to disperse them. I saw police hitting. I saw a white man standing there. The police were hitting everybody. People started running, some into the alley, some into my house. I saw Peach. I then saw a policeman with a shield attack Peach. There were demonstrators at the top of Beechcroft Avenue. I decided to move my car in case there was trouble. See, I was in my garden when 2 police vans came and about 20 policemen got out. Police were carrying shields and truncheons, black truncheons. They tried to break up a line of people and came running down the road, pulling them by the hair and hitting them with sticks. This boy was standing on a corner next to the wall when everybody came running past. He got tangled up in it and knocked over. Then when he was lying on the ground, the police came rushing past him as they chased the other blokes down the road. As the policemen rushed past him, one of them hit him on the head with a stick. I was in my garden. I saw this quite clearly. When they all rushed past, the boy was left sitting against the wall. He tried to get up, but he was shivering and looked very strange. He couldn't stand. Then the policeman came back and told him like this, "Move! Come on, move!"
The officer's behaviour was entirely in accord with standard police procedure.
But they were very rough with him. And I was shocked because it was clear that he was seriously hurt. His tongue seemed to be stuck to the top of his mouth and his eyes were rolled up to the top of his head. But they started pushing him and told him to move. And he managed to get to his feet. He staggered across the road and came to where I was in the garden. I tried to sit him down. He was in a very bad state and he couldn't speak. Then he just dropped down. I got a glass of water for him, but he couldn't hold it and it dropped out of his hand.
I was called from the operating theatre at New Evening Hospital at about 9 o'clock. I found Mr. Peach on a trolley in the casualty department, thrashing about as if he was suffering some cerebral irritation. His pulse was between 50 and 60. His left eye was dilated and did not react to light. While I was examining him, he deteriorated in front of my eyes. The respiration became slower and slower. His pulse went down to below 50. I drilled into the right side of Mr. Peach's head and found no blood clot there, although the brain was bulging out under pressure. And when I drilled the left hand side, I was able to release about half a pint of blood which had built up in a cavity. Too many veins had been sheared off to stop the bleeding. Mr. Peach's blood pressure dropped further and further. His condition again deteriorated, and at this time his heart stopped. Mr. Peach had suffered a massive skull injury. In my limited experience, I've never come across a fracture of this severity. From the way the skull was moving, it seemed that it had been split clean in half.
I knew it was Blair. A teacher from East London has been killed following the intervention of the police at an anti-racist demonstrations in London. Who else but Blair? The news bulletins made their announcements all through the morning. How many other teachers like me, how many others knew it would be Blair? For he had been the most committed, the most exemplary, the most selfless in every way. At 1:45 a.m. on Tuesday, April the 24th, I identified Blair's body at New Evening Hospital.
Anti-fascism was seen by the police as a problem. But whose side was the law on? My nephew, who was 7, was in primary school in Bristol, and they had a police officer come to explain to them how policemen are your friends. Young Garrick puts his hand up and says, "I don't understand, why did you kill Blair Peach then?" Yeah, the SPG thought they could do anything. 36 barristers wrote a letter saying there'd been a miscarriage of justice in Southall. It was a complete travesty. How did the Met get away with that murder? The downright lies. It was so utterly depressing.
After the autopsy, Blair lay in state at the Dominion Theatre overnight with a guard from the Asian youth. 10,000 people turned out to accompany the coffin, which went very slowly through Southall and then on to Phoenix School in East London where he taught. And there was another 10,000 people waiting.
He was just an ordinary joker. We used to call him Plum. He liked his soccer. His father was a coach and Blair played for Hawke's Bay. He was good, but he was just a little fella, small and wiry. He was the sort of guy when he got older that women wanted to mother. Almost the only politics I remember Blair being involved in was Maori. He was always sympathetic. Blair Peach, playing out on the right wing, slippery bastard, skinny bastard, wiry, tough bastard, taking the ball down to the line, looking up, crossing it, every Saturday, Nelson Park.
Who killed Blair Peach?
I was 29, youngest inspector appointed to the SPG. I was going to be commander by the age of 40. Chief Constable 10 years later, the climax of a glittering career. And then I was the first out of the van, yes. I was carrying a police radio in one hand, yes. But I didn't do it, nor any of the men in my vehicle. I don't have eyes in the back of my head, and we were in a riot, so I mean, things happen you just don't see. I mean...
10 days after Blair Peach was murdered, Margaret Thatcher, leader of the British Conservative Party, was elected Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. She stood outside number 10 Downing Street and read out a prayer. Where there is discord, may we bring harmony. Where there is error, may we bring truth. Where there is doubt, may we bring faith. And where there is despair, may we bring hope. With the advent of the Conservative Party's hard right, there was now no need for a neo-Nazi anti-immigrant group. The National Front, whose election meeting in the middle of the Indian community of Southall had ended with the death of Blair Peach, faded into the background. No one was ever charged with the murder.
Once I had a love and it was a gas, soon turned out had a heart of glass.
We are the Sultans. We are the Sultans.
Hit me with your rhythm stick. Hit me. Je t'adore, lieber dich. Hit me.
Oliver's army is here to stay. Oliver's army is on their way. And I would rather be anywhere else than here today.
And then there are 3 speakers after the break.